Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education that leads to boundless opportunities. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent. And it is Thursday, October 25th, and welcome to episode number 39, What You Need to Know About the ACT. In this week's news, we're featuring a recent article in the New York Times about students being turned away by their universities after seeking support for serious mental health issues. And we are in chapter 39 of 171 answers, and Mark is telling us everything we need to know about the ACT test. And this week's question asks, what would happen if a former spouse is listed as the custodial parent on the FAFSA application because they make less money, even though the child doesn't live with them? And this week, Mark interviews Mr. Brennan Barnard, Director of College Counseling at Deerfield School, and they're talking about 20 mistakes that parents make in the college process.
Anika, Joy came to me the other day and she said she thinks she wants to switch from being a middle school or a high school counselor, and she thinks she wants to work on a college campus and help kids with their problems. Yeah, and she said she wants to have her own private practice on the side, and she wants to focus her private practice on helping students with school-related anxiety and depression. And so, knowing her, I'm thinking, oh, this is like so her. This is great. And then she says, and I think I want to go to North Carolina, Chapel Hill to get my master's. Now, my aunt went there. And so I'm thinking this is awesome. I love North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And then she says, oh, and I think I may just want to stay in North Carolina with my sister. And I'm like, what's up with North Carolina? You're taking my whole family away from me.
It's the hot spot.
It's the hurricane spot.
Sorry, hot Atlanta.
It's the hurricane, hurricane spot. Michael, and what was that other one? I can't get the name right. That big one that came through you.
Adam, Eve, all of them.
It's all good. It's all good. It's close enough I can get there. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, Mark, this week's article, pretty heavy stuff. It's entitled Feeling Suicidal. Students Turn to Their College and They Were Told to Go Home. And this is written recently in the New York Times, and it's by Miss Anemona Hartocollis. I'm hopeful that I got that right.
At least you tried it. Normally you just avoid names.
I tried it.
At least you tried it.
Miss Anemona, please pardon moi if I didn't get that right. But what this is about, Mark, is it's about these universities, and they really focus on Stanford in a really specific case that she highlights about this young man who went to his college counseling because he was dealing with depression and anxiety. And ultimately what happens is that they tell him to get checked into a facility. They give him some medication, which he claims that took him to an even darker level than what he was. And they forced him to go on a leave of absence away from the school. So they go in and they cite a few other universities that are dealing with these issues. But what this is all about is students feeling discriminated against with their mental health concerns, and these schools making them take leaves of absences that they don't want to take. Now, I know we can see I can see the good and the bad, honestly, Mark, on both sides of the fence. But I would love to hear your thoughts on all of this.
Well, one of the things I think we should let our listeners know right away is the main reason why we selected this article was we just want to bring intense or increased attention to mental health because kids are struggling out there. They're under so much pressure, and it's worse than it has ever been for our youth. And we're going to be having an expert in the spring come on for an interview and talk about the importance of mental health and what parents can do, what students can do to avoid some mental health maladies that we see. But the main reason that's why we mostly selected it, not to necessarily take sides, because, one thing I've learned, I learned this early on in my counseling, even that I do, college coaching, sometimes I'll meet with one parent, particularly when parents are split, and they'll talk to me. Oh, you don't know the other parent that my child is like, they're like the devil incarnate, and then you meet the other parent and they make the other parent sound like the devil incarnate. And so, I've kind of learned that like we're getting the student's perspective in this article, right? And we're not getting the school's perspective. But some of the things to highlight in this article. So obviously it talks about mental health problems being an epidemic on college campuses. One of the things it says in this article is that more than 50% of students do not want to come forward because of the stigma associated, with a mental health illness, right? So it sort of drives kids underground. And while it's true in this article, the student is saying that the school, in this case, Stanford, they felt basically dropped the kid like a hot potato and told him to leave and seek help elsewhere. And then that led to a number of other problems. I can't help but be a little biased because of my experience. And so my experience has been, and this comes both from working in a boarding school and seeing many kids who had to leave because of different, mental health challenges, as well as students I've worked with in college counseling that have had to leave colleges because of their mental health challenges. I can't think of a time, Anika, when it wasn't good for them to leave. And some of the reasons for leaving would be they need to be under professional care, maybe psychiatric care, and something beyond what the school can handle. And another reason is that there's a concern that their problems could spread to other students, and then other students maybe start thinking about suicide or cutting or some of the other serious ailments we see inflict students. So, those are some of my initial thoughts. What are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking about the other young lady that they mentioned in here where she was actually sent home twice, maybe even 3 times. But either way, her mom's concern was that her family's concern was that, okay, if you send her away, it's just going to get worse. Like she's just going to go home and crawl up into a ball and suffer. So I just wonder how much involvement they bring the family into all of this. When you got the kid out there on their own, doing their thing, just trying to make it through their academics, through their social lives and all of that. When is it time to bring the family back into the picture and to start working through a plan? Because I did notice that there wasn't necessarily mention of a plan between the institution and the kid. And again, remember, this is one perspective, right? So we don't know the full story. But that would be my number one concern, is that where's the plan of action that would have been put in place for that student? And what is the policy for these institutions to have in place when it comes to a plan? Now, I know we talk about Ferpa and the kids, having to actually give the parent back the right to have access to their information, whether it's financial, medical, and all that stuff. But well, let me talk about that, because I think a lot of people may not be familiar with that. So, and the more you talk about this is just really complex, because I mentioned the one side, right, which is I can understand the school's perspective of we are not psychiatric specialists, and being under the care of a professional and not having this become potentially an epidemic in the school is really in the community's best interest. I also understand the other side, which is now the kid feels shunned and feels stigmatized, and that can lead to more depression, more anxiety. I get that. And now you brought in a third complicating factor, which is FERPA. So if that's a new term for our listeners, FERPA refers to the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It's a 1974 federal law, and all schools that get money from the Department of Education have to comply. And basically what FERPA has to do is it gives the right of privacy to students, so that unless a student gives explicit permission to the parent, the school is not permitted to share with the parent things like grades, health information, financial documents, admission information, application information, discipline information, photographs, written documents, transcripts, testing data, notes, and memos. So, by the way, one of the takeaways from this is make sure your child signs a release. If you're paying the money, you can say, listen, little Johnny, like, I need to see the grades, I need to see the health, I need to see the moolah, the money. Right.
And that's a little bit about student. Now FERPA, initially, FERPA will allow parents to sort of see directory information like phone, email, and campus address. But even that, the student can make private.
Right.
And the student, so this can be complicated, because sometimes the school may even want to contact a parent, and they may not have permission to contact a parent. So it's just, I mean, these are very, very, very complicated situations, right? Because I certainly can't sending the child home, can lead, because now this child, everybody's saying, why are you going? And so now the kid probably feels more depressed, more anxiety, more, they feel like the school magnified it. But I kind of see both sides on this. And I think What do you see as our takeaways for our families, Anika?
Stay in touch with your kids.
Ferpa?
Well, yeah, number
Right.
one, make sure they get that Ferpa squared away. You paying your money. But stay in tune with your kids. Know what's going on with them. Check in on them. Mental health checks are necessary, and they are just more real than we want to believe. But yeah, it's real out there, real in these streets.
Well, and I want to add just unconditional love and acceptance.
That's
you know,
Mm-hmm.
I've seen kids leave, and I've seen the most healing occur,
Mm-hmm.
and really a lot of just tremendous success stories. Because a lot of times when I see this, it's depression related, and it's kids had actually struggled with depression before this as well. It's just magnified in a
Right.
college environment.
Yep.
And the times when the most healing is when parents are sending that message: "I love you exactly who you are. I'm so proud of you, and I just want you to be emotionally whole, whatever it takes, and I support you 100%." And sometimes this is my experience. If the parent has had their own struggles, even if it's not in that area,
Mm-hmm.
it can be helpful for the parent to share their own struggles too, because then the kid realizes, oh, wow, I guess I'm not the only one that has challenges.
Yep. There it is. All right, Mark. Our question for the week is from an anonymous parent. They reside in Pennsylvania. We can tell them that, right?
Mhm.
And so here's the question verbatim. What happens if I list my former husband as the custodial parent because he makes less money than I do, even though my son lives
Wait a minute, Anika,
Uh-oh.
you know we
Yeah.
skipped the chapter.
Oh, darn.
You know we just
I was like, man, we rolling. Whoopsie. Okay. Chapter time. Sorry.
It's all good. It is all good.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
So, listeners, this is the part of our podcast where we kind of consider it our walkthrough of the college admission process. We don't want you to have any gaps at all in your background. So I wrote a book called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, and I have one chapter for every question that I get asked a lot. And so we're just going all the way through that book, taking question at a time and hitting on a few key points. And so the question that we're answering today is what is the ACT? And Anika, why don't you start us off by kind of telling us what your thoughts were?
Well, you have this most beautiful chart, Mark, that lays out in this chapter, and it literally breaks down the sections, how long they are, the content, the types of questions. So you really nailed it because you just outlined it neatly for us there. What I did not know was that the ACT is used in some states as as a checkpoint or as a milestone for their students, like within their school districts. So that was pretty new to me. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, so let me talk about that a little bit. First of all, a bit more of an overview. So the SAT was the first test to be accepted, and every college really in the country will accept the SAT or the ACT. Every school will accept both tests. And so the ACT, grew out of the Midwest. So that's why you'll often see a lot of states, Iowa, Michigan, Illinois, be big ACT states. And it came about more than 30 years after the SAT. And in 1959, and it was found with some real passion because the idea behind it was tests should be mostly based on content mastery and curriculum rather than on aptitude or reasoning, which is how the SAT was. And for the first, 70 years of the SATs, 63 years technically, of the ACT's founding, the SAT was still the dominant test. But in 2012, the ACT actually passed the SAT. And there are approximately 2.1 million ACT test takers. And then the gap started to grow and grow and grow. And so the ACT, has 4 sections. It has an English, a math, or reading, and a science section with an optional essay. And each section, you get a score between 1 and 36. And you have these 215 multiple choice questions. And that's a lot of questions for a short period of time. So a lot of times ACT students who struggle with the pacing of the ACT. But to get back to your point, Anika, what really led to the ACT surpassing the SAT was, I don't know if you remember, there was a lot of talk about Common Core, and aligning the curriculum with Common Core. And so the ACT was seen as being more aligned with Common Core, which core content that was trying to be taught across the country to make sure there was subject mastery. So what happened was 12 states actually adopted the ACT as their official test to test mastery of school content, of material. And so obviously if you pick up a state contract, you're talking about, hundreds of thousands of kids. And that's really what led to the ACT, surging ahead of the SAT. Anything else about the ACT, want to talk about?
No, Mark. But I do want to mention this because it hasn't been, I feel like it hasn't been quite a year since I've talked to a parent that thought that their kid, because I know we're talking about the SAT next week, right?
Correct.
There was a parent I remember speaking to that didn't realize their kid didn't have to take both tests. Like they felt like they knew, like they thought the kid had to prepare for both tests and take them and submit both scores. Is that still a common thing? I feel like that kind of phased out a little bit. Like people were starting to understand, like, no, you pick one and you study for one. So is that still a thing? Are people still confused about that? Do we need to?
Yeah, I get that question probably like every other month from somebody. Do I need to take both?
Really?
Yeah, but what I find I get more often than that is a student takes an ACT or an SAT, they don't like their score, so then they hop on over to the other test, then they don't like their score, then they go back to the other test. And this is something I vehemently oppose. Like, I do believe in doing detailed assessment, figuring out which test you're better at, keeping in mind that most students do similar on both tests, about 80% actually. And then don't even ever touch the test. Like, both my kids were better on the SAT. So they went through assessment, figured out they're better at the SAT. They never took an ACT in their life. So that's, but let's say a few more things about the ACT. There's, in the English section, there's 75 questions. You have 45 minutes. It deals with grammar, usage, punctuation, sentence structure. The math, you've got 60 questions in 60 minutes, and it's a lot of math in the ACT. And so that's also one of the differences with the SAT. The SAT has math, it's very algebra focused. And the ACT certainly has a lot of pre-algebra, elementary algebra, intermediate algebra, but there is more geometry, both coordinate and plane geometry, and trig. So that's one of the differences. There's math, there's reading, but not as much reading as you get on the SAT. And there is a science section. So that's definitely one of the differences. 40 questions, 35 minutes, but it tends to be more interpretation, analysis, and evaluation, reading graphs and charts and problem solving. And so, that's the ACT, and it's a pretty straightforward test. It's changed a little bit over the years, certainly, but not like the SAT. When we get into the SAT next week, massive changes with the SAT. It's like, I don't think it really has a good sense of its own identity.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
I really do have a lot of respect for the ACT, though, Anika. It kind of knows who it is, and it's sort of like the student who's confident in their identity, and they're not trying to fake and be somebody else. The SAT keeps trying to be somebody else. It's not sure who it wants to be. It's got an identity complex, and guess what? That identity has a lot to do with what marketing, right? So, I mean, these two tests fiercely compete with one another, and anytime one's gaining on the other, then you can kind of expect some changes to occur probably in the other test. It's about market share. It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Mark, our question is coming from an anonymous parent in Pennsylvania. And her question reads, what happens if I list my former husband as the custodial parent because he makes less money than I do, even though my son lives with me?
So check this out, Anika. I kid you not. Listeners, it's about 7:45 right now. I had a phone call at 6:30 tonight. So that's literally only an hour and 15 minutes ago that was asking this same thing.
Oh,
is that crazy?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I had to say the same thing to that parent I'm going to say to our listening family. And that is, lying on the FAFSA is a crime.
Ooh.
And it's a crime that can have serious consequences. First of all, let me go into a little background to just explain this. So what happens for parents who are divorced or who are separated is if their kid is applying to a school and they're applying for financial aid, whether they want a low interest loan or a need-based grant, or even some schools require the FAFSA to be submitted even to get merit money from the schools. The FAFSA only asks for what they now call Parent A. I'm trying to get used to that, Anika. That's like the politically correct term for what used to be called the custodial parent.
Okay.
So Parent A, that's the only parent that you have to submit financial information on. You only have to submit Parent A. And the way the FAFSA defines Parent A is which parent did you live with 51% of the time. So that can be confusing to people because sometimes people say, well, like the other parent claimed the child on the tax return, so I guess they need to put that on the FAFSA. No, that's a completely different question. One parent could claim a child on the tax return. That's not what the FAFSA is asking. It said, which parent did you live with 51% of the time? And the other parent is basically invisible. In other words, the Department of Education doesn't see their income or their asset information, and it's not factored at all into the need-based formula of what need-based age the student is eligible for. So what happens is sometimes parents get a little savvy and they're like, okay, I make $65,000, and my ex-spouse makes $400,000. I'm actually giving you real numbers from a real situation that I worked with, by the way. Those are, I have somebody in mind, but obviously I'm not going to put them on blast and say their name, but I have a real situation in mind. It was over a decade ago, this one. So they think, okay, I know that they live with the parent that makes $400,000, but that means I'm going to have to report their $400,000 income. Okay, I may not be Einstein, but I wasn't born yesterday. I see where this is going. I'm not going to qualify for any money, but if I put the $65,000 income, I'm probably going to qualify for some need-based age, and the wheels start turning, right? But the schools oftentimes can figure this out. Any idea how they can figure it out, Anika?
Well, let me see. Stealing is never right. A good thing.
Right.
So
I know that's true, but I'm asking how do they bust you when you do it?
Well, I'm saying that because they're always sniffing it out, right? Like, it's like their little tentacles are always up for all of these deceitful little things that may or may not be happening. So, I mean, it's a paper trail. Like, how do you hide? Like, I don't get, you know what? Let me stop. I don't get how people steal anyway, and like all this embezzlement and all of this. You're gonna get caught. Like, how do you go? How do you think you're not gonna get caught? That's just me personally, because you're on paper, like you're documented somewhere. Somebody's gonna catch up to you at some point in time. Like, I just don't get how people think that they can hide away from that. I'm sorry, Mark. That's all I got.
Well, sometimes they do get away. Like, as the amount of fraud that happens where people get away with this is, I saw the numbers; they were staggering. But you can get caught, and there's ways you can get caught. 1/3 of all FAFSA applicants have to go through a process called verification, and we're going to have a special guest talk about that coming up in December, actually. And where they're going to dig a lot deeper into first for more financial information to make sure everything lines up. Plus, one of the little things sometimes that can give people away is when the tax returns are loaded up, it can have the child custody information on there.
Yeah, paper. Exactly. Documentation.
Yeah. And they can see, okay, so you're getting a child support. How does that work out? Why are you getting child? And so the bottom line is it serious? And if somebody actually does commit this fraud intentionally and they mention it to somebody else, they actually have a hotline, Anika. The U.S. Department of Education, they have an Office of the Inspector General with the number 1-800-MISUSED is the number. I'm serious. And take a guess what
are they giving out reward amounts? Are they giving out reward amounts?
They're not giving out reward amounts, but I'll tell you what they are doing. Fining you up to $20,000 and throwing you in the slammer, possibly. Ooh. Yeah, you can go to prison and face a $20,000 fine. Now, that's that's the most draconian, and so that's not always it. But when you sign something, it's right on there. When you read the FAFSA, you read the fine print. It makes it very clear that this is a contract with the federal government that you are not going to falsify information. And so a lot of times they'll just boot you out of school and expel you and give you a smaller fine. But I just want to say to anyone who's thinking about do this, first of all, what lesson are you teaching your kid? I always say that. What lesson are you teaching your kid? Secondly, no amount of a little bit extra money is worth the guilty conscience and not sleeping well at night, because in your heart of heart, you know that you didn't do the right thing. And thirdly, is it really? Do you really want to possibly pay $20,000 and then spend some time in the slammer?
Bottom line, don't do it.
Yeah. Now, I will say this, and Nick, and this is so sad. I so sad. So there have been two occasions in my life where I was explaining this to a family, right? And then they got slick on me. They said, "Well, what about if we just split up right now?" I'm serious. What if we just split up right now, and then we can go have the kid live with the lower parent that makes least amount of money? And I remember the last time it happened, it was about 6 years ago. I literally just dropped my head on my desk. I'm like, oh boy, this is not why I went into coaching, into counseling, to break families up. Because that is not technically illegal. So, but what could I say? I'm not trying to teach you how to, break families up.
Oh my goodness. Don't do it, people. Darn it.
Oh, sometimes you just have to laugh. It's better than crying. Our regular listeners, you'll recognize the name Brennan Barnard. We've read several of Brennan's articles and discussed them on our podcast. He is a prolific writer who writes for Huffington Post, Forbes, Washington Post, and wears a number of hats. I also had the privilege of working with Brennan at the Westtown School from 2001 to 2004. And over the next 3 episodes, he's going to be our special interview. And I think you're going to really, really love hearing our conversation about, we both draw off each other's experience and we share what we collectively agreed on are 20 common mistakes parents make in the college admission process. Listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, you are in for a real treat today. We have someone who has the pulse of the national landscape of college admissions as much as any guest I will interview. We have Mr. Brennan Barnard with us today. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Brennan.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.
So I had the privilege of being a colleague with Brennan from 2001 to 2004 at the Westtown School in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and just an overall great guy who builds relationships really well. Brennan Barnard, who's actually written about college admissions for the New York Times, Washington Post, Huffington Post, and Forbes. But Brennan is so much more than just a writer. He's also a practitioner. So, Brennan, why don't you tell our listeners some of the other many hats you wear when it comes to college admissions?
Okay, absolutely. So I'm the director of college counseling and outreach at the Derryfield School, which is a 6 through 12 independent day school in Manchester, New Hampshire. And so I'm the director of college counseling there. And I also serve as the director of college counseling for an online school, independent online school for elite athletes, which is U.S. Performance Academy. So I kind of oversee their college program, and then also just involved in a couple of things, like I serve on the advisory board for the Turning the Tide initiative with Harvard Grad School of Education's Making Caring Common project, and also on the executive committee of the Character Collaborative, which is previously known as the Institute for Character and Admission. So those are just some things that I'm involved in because I really I think we need to kind of keep bringing college admissions back to the purpose it serves and character and concern for others and the common good.
And so I know our listeners are wondering, like, how is he finding time to sleep? And believe it or not, Brendan left off a couple of things. He's a father of a couple of kids, and he's also a firefighter, which I think is pretty cool.
I am. I actually got a call in the middle of the night last night. So if I doze off during the podcast, you know why, right?
Yeah, we'll totally cut you some slack on that one. Fantastic. So Brennan committed to be a guest on your College Bound Kid podcast about 4 months ago, and we immediately agreed on a topic. And for the last 4 months, we've kind of been emailing each other, just kind of tweaking our content for today. And I personally think this is going to be one of our more helpful interviews for our listeners. So we know that a lot of parents and guardians are our main audience, and oftentimes you're very well intentioned and you're not trying to do anything other than help your kid. But there are some mistakes that parents can make. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about 20 mistakes parents/guardians sometimes make in the college process. And what we're going to do is divide these 20 mistakes up into 3 categories. So we're going to talk about mistakes that involve sort of inappropriate parent involvement, and we've got 6 of them. Mistakes that result in parents sort of not validating their own child's self-worth in the process. We've got 5 of them. And then we have 9 mistakes that deal with either financial missteps or just a general lack of planning in general. Brennan, anything you want to say before we get started?
No, I mean, just that, we could make an equally as long list of all the wonderful things that parents do in college admission. But sometimes these kind of things, these red flags are helpful for parents as they think through college admission.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you said that's so appropriate. And hint, I might have to ask Brennan, 2019 or 20 to come back and put that list together. So that would actually be a great podcast as well. Thanks for sharing that, Brennan. So let's kick it off. Let's jump into these, sort of 6 inappropriate involvement, mistakes that parents can make. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the topic, and then I'll let you just share a couple things, impressions you have, anything from your experience. So the first one would be writing the essay for your child, or even overly editing it to the place where it crosses the line. What do you want to say about this, Brennan?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot with the college essay, actually. I teach a course in the summer about kind of helping students find their voice in this personal narrative. And this idea of voice is so important. And that's one of the biggest dangers of over-involvement by parents, is that the college essay can quickly lose the student's voice and take on the parent's voice. And to be honest, college admissions officers who are pros at reading these essays, they can tell, hands down, as soon as a parent has kind of put their thumbprint on the essay, and so I think parents really need to be careful that they don't, the essay doesn't sound like it was written by a 45-year-old. I actually had a family I worked with a couple years ago, and the parent required the student to share the essay with him, this is a father, before the student submitted the application. And so the student had, worked on the essay, done a bunch of drafts, really got to a place where he felt it was good and was ready to submit. The father read it over, and I guess made a few edits, unbeknownst to the kid, and they submitted it, and the student went back, a couple days later, and one of the edits the father had made was misspelled.
Ouch.
And so I think as much as you can just empower your children to take ownership for the essay and have it be their own voice, I think that's what's the most important.
And I think this is a real tough one, because it's where do you draw the line between a little feedback and crossing the line? Robin Mamlet, who Brendan knows, previously served in a number of admission capacities, including director of admission at Stanford. She goes so far as to say not one word of the essay should not originally come from the student. And I don't know if that's too strong, but it's a guide I try to keep in mind when I'm working with a student, to try to help them inductively come up with their own language. Any thoughts on how someone can, like, I don't think you would say a parent should never read an essay, right? It's just more the any tip to help it?
Yeah, no,
where do they draw the line?
Yeah, I mean, I think parents, and I'm a parent, like you mentioned. I mean, we know our children best, right? And sometimes that is works to our advantage, and sometimes it doesn't. And so I think absolutely parents should read it if the child is open to that. But it's when they start to wordsmith too much, and they kind of are heavy-handed. That's where it really runs into problems. And it's especially dangerous in this kind of age of Google Docs, where you can suggest things. And so parents will read through a child's essay and make suggestions of word choice and things like that. And soon it kind of loses its originality.
Great, thanks. And parents, just really keep in mind what Brennan said, that experienced readers can tell a voice of a 45, 50-year-old. They just can. So our next one would be number 2, insisting that your child select a certain major or pursue a certain career. Anything you want to share with us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I just, I've worked with a lot of students who get to college. They're focused on this major, this kind of career path that their parents have picked out for them, and very soon, things unravel. If they're not invested in it personally, oftentimes they either they have mental health issues, or their grades are failing, and they're kind of just not involved in the way they would be if it was coming from them. And so, we think we know what's best again for our kids, and sometimes that's true. But I think it can really steer a child, a student, astray.
Yeah, and a lot of times with this one, I find it, once again, like so many of these, maybe all of them, they come from a healthy motive. A lot of times the parent has struggled maybe financially, and they think, oh, I don't see how you're going to make enough money looking at that major. But it's just important for us to remember that, our child's lives are not our do-over, right? They're not our second chance to vicariously live through them. And that's, I think, tempting for all of us to resist that.
Yeah, I would just add that, there's a great book that Parker Palmer wrote called Let Your Life Speak.
Right.
And it's all about kind of listening for your own voice and vocation and career. And I would recommend that to any parent, any student or parent, but kind of this idea of finding something you love and that you can be successful with is really a kind of a journey, and it's one that the student has to
say that book one more time, Brennan, because some of the best feedback we get in emails are from people that say, we love these resources you're sharing. So if you want to share that one more time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's by Parker Palmer, he was the author of The Courage to Teach. And the book is Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation.
Thank you. Awesome. So the third point is not trusting the college counselor / school counselor when they come up with suggestions, or another way of putting it is just being extremely difficult to work with. And both Brennan and I are both college counselors, so I know we could both draw off a lot of stories on this. But Brennan, our listeners hear from me every day. What do you want to share on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that it's important to just go into this with the idea that we're all on the same team, right? That everybody's out for the student's best interest and for finding the right match for that student. And so often families can feel like maybe their student isn't kind of the student that the school counselor is as invested in as they are other students, or something like that. And so it can feel like an adversarial relationship. But I guess I would just recommend that parents get in early and meet with the counselor and get to know the counselor, so they can build that trust and have faith that they have their students' best interest in mind.
And if our first-time listeners, in episodes 22, 23, and 24, we had an interview with Brandy Smith, who worked at 4 colleges, as well as been a school counselor at 2, and she talks about how to work effectively with your counselor. That may be one you want to go back and listen to. What I find so oftentimes, Brennan, is, oftentimes students do have, or parents have, colleges on their list that are unlikely, schools for them to be admitted at. And, I think what parents need to know is it's not necessarily fun for us to relay to you or your child that, your probability of admission at this school is unlikely, and we're going to have to look at some other schools. That's not something that we revel in, but understand that when we do that, we really do have your best interest at heart. We don't want you fixating on some pipe dream and not losing out on what could be a fantastic opportunity at another school.
Right.
Yes.
Don't shoot the messenger, right?
Yes.
I mean, I have a colleague who has a sign over the door to his office that says, "The college counseling office where dreams go to die."
Yeah.
No, I mean, our jobs as counselors, they're to kind of speak the truth as we know it, right? And to to kind of look at a student's list and look at their aspirations and kind of thread the needle and find the right match for that student and help them. And so, I think if you can bet on the best in everyone in this circumstance, that's the way to go, because we wouldn't be in this work if we didn't love working with kids and families and trying to
exactly.
help them.
And I can understand why this is hard for parents, because I mean, Brennan and I could literally talk for hours about how much more difficult it is to get into certain schools now than it once was. But you just take a school, for example, like the University of Pennsylvania, which, early 80s had acceptance rates around 50%, right? And now,
Right.
Single digits. And so if parents are thinking about how things were when they were older, it's somewhat understandable how there can be a disconnect there. But some things have, not for all schools, because it's, 200 or so schools, maybe, around there that are uber selective. But, it's just something to keep in mind. So let's move on. Go ahead, Brandon. Yeah, no, say what you wanted to say. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. I was just going to say, I mean, and even, not even recently, right? Like you take a school
Yes.
like Northeastern, where, a parent might have a neighbor or a friend whose daughter was admitted 5 years ago or 2 years ago, and now their own child's applying, and that they have become just uber selective in the last couple of years even. And so just being cognizant of that and relying on the school counselor to know those shifts.
I'm really glad you brought that up. We don't need to go back to the 80s. It's funny. I was on a conversation with a boarding school college counselor this week with doing joint counseling, because it's one of my students there. And we were talking about schools that have gotten so much harder to get into. And it was a New England boarding school. And of course, Northeastern was one of the ones that came up. And we could go on and on. Villanova's gotten a lot harder with their basketball success. And boy, you know what? Yeah. And when I was at Westtown, Brennan, University of Chicago, they were having acceptance rates in the 30s, early 30s, so there's right. So this is the landscape that we're dealing with out here. Yeah. So the fourth one would be, insisting on rigor when your child, won't necessarily excel with the rigor, that you may want them to take. So this is the parent that hears, colleges are looking for rigor. And then they think, my child has to be in every advanced class. But you want to comment on this, Brennan, and how important it is to strike balance and how important it is to take classes you can excel in and that sort of thing, whatever's on your mind.
Yeah. There, I don't know where it was coming from, but a couple years, maybe a year or two ago, I kept on hearing this number of 7 APs. Like parents kept on saying, I've heard that you need to, to get into a good school, a quote unquote good school, you need to have 7 APs. I don't know if somebody wrote a book saying that or what it was. But, and so a lot of parents were saying, well, what if my student doesn't have those, that many APs? And again, college admissions officers really read within the context of the school, but also within the context of what a student can handle. And so parents who worry about, are they going to have enough rigor and push their students to maybe take a course they weren't recommended for, or take on a course load that's just overreaching, can really have the negative effect of, a student maybe getting a lower grade and, or just, struggling all year long in a course that,
like you said, some of the mental health issues that can come in, doubting yourself, having a terrible high school experience, not being able to balance school with other things they may be doing. So many things come along with that. But I had to chuckle when you said that, Brennan, because I was at a session last Friday. It was Georgia Tech, Georgia, and Georgia State. And they were doing a presentation. They do this Peach State tour they do. And so it was like 20 counselors there we were all together in Peachtree City. And Georgia Tech actually has sort of taken away their average APs down off of their profile. They used to have it up there. And so one of the counselors was really drilling the Georgia Tech rep, like, you used to have your APs on, why do you not have the number of APs up there? And this is the reason they gave, because people think that that's a magic number, and we read schools in the context. And so I had to, and the person kept coming back. Yeah, but it's not helping us. I'm like, oh boy. So, yeah.
Yeah. And we're actually at Dairyfield, we're actually moving beyond APs next year. We're not going to offer APs anymore. We'll be offering kind of high level advanced topics courses. But, one of the concerns in doing that was, what if, aren't colleges looking for APs? And, we talked to lots and lots of colleges of all levels of selectivity, and they really are looking at the school profile and what the school offers and what the student is capable of.
And our listeners, I can assure you, Brennan has not heard our episode on that. So we did a whole episode on that. And of course, I was at Westtown when Westtown dropped APs, and I was doing boarding school admissions. Yeah. Right. Oh, you were there then at the time too. Yeah. Cause I had to get the overlap. So yeah. And you guys talked with colleges all the time and the feedback and it worked out really, really well. So yeah, that's a trend amongst certain schools. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, in order to get need-based federal financial aid or low-interest federal loans, you need to complete the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid. And our recommended resource for episode 39 is a full walkthrough of the FAFSA. So what you do is you go to youtube.com and then type in 2019-20 FAFSA full walkthrough. And you're going to see a light blue background, and it's going to say Step Up to Higher Education. That's the one I want you to use. I love this organization. They do an amazing step-by-step full walkthrough. This particular one just went up 3 weeks ago. They put a new one up every year. It's 24 minutes long, and it's got 80 positive thumbs up and only 3 down. So many times students are concerned about making mistakes. You just walk through step by step, and it will answer almost all your questions, and it'll show you how you should complete the FAFSA. I highly recommend the 2019-20 FAFSA full walkthrough by Step Up to Higher Ed. It's an organization out of Utah that does a stupendous job. Now return to my interview with Brennan Barnard. Yeah, so keep it moving on. Our fifth point would be parent dominating the questions at the information session, or dominating the questions on the tour, or even dominating the ongoing communication with the admission office. So this is sort of our fifth point under sort of inappropriate involvement errors the parents can make. Anything you want to share about this one, Brennan?
Yeah. I mean, don't be that guy, right? So, anybody who's been on a college tour has probably seen that parent who is, right on the heels of the tour guide and is peppering them with questions, and the student is lagging at the back, trying to pretend that they're not in any way related to that parent. I mean, it really it takes the power away from the student, right? I mean, we want our students to be kind of self-directed and to be invested in their education. And as soon as we are, setting up all the college tours for them, and we're emailing college admissions folks from the student's account as though we're the student, it's doing a disservice to our kids. And we see it all the time, and college admissions officers, have stories upon stories of the parent who is trying to kind of pretend they're the student, and it kind of it's a red flag for parents or for college admissions officers. They not only roll their eyes, but they worry about kind of the resilience of the child and how involved that parent's going to continue to be while the child's at college.
Yeah, and the colleges are very mindful of the fact that the parent, you're not the one coming, the student is. So the student's going to be the one there 24/7. So they really want to hear that voice. And, I'll share something. Brennan and I were talking a little bit before we started our recording, but this Saturday, I'm going to be at a huge college fair with like 3,500 students and 350 colleges. And the colleges actually implemented a policy 2 years ago that said they only wanted students in the fair. Now, I know that every fair is different, and, that's not true everywhere, but they did this because parents were being so, onerous and just, dominating the conversation. And so what actually happened last year, Brennan, was parents were serving as volunteers, because when you have a huge event like that, you need all kinds of volunteers. But then parents were sneaking in and they were sneaking in and getting questions in and dominating the line still. So this year they actually had to implement a policy that said parents couldn't even be volunteers. They using all the other private schools that were inviting to be volunteers. And we hired, our listeners know I'm both a private college coach, but I also work in the day at KIPP. And so we hired Ohio State representative this year on our KIPP to College counseling team, and she's fantastic. And I was talking to Jillian. I was like, Jillian, did that really happen last year? And she's like, every one of the schools you can talk to, they will tell you they had an experience where a parent snuck onto the table that was a volunteer and say, has my kid come by yet, or something like that. So just letting you know, like, colleges wouldn't have a policy of not wanting the parents to be there if it wasn't for the fact that they want students to be front and central.
Right. And that's not to say there shouldn't be any parent involvement. And we're not saying, we need to totally shut parents out of this process, right? Or this experience, because it really is a family experience going through the college admission experience. But when the parent is leading it and the student is kind of lagging on behind.
Yeah. And I'm really glad you said that, Brennan, because the last thing I want a parent to think is, gee, so I can never ask a question at an info session, or if I'm on it. No, we're not saying that, but just make sure your child is communicating more than you are. Yeah. And so our sixth point and our final point in this section of inappropriate involvement mistakes would be talking about college with your child 24/7. What do you want to share on this one, Brennan?
Oh man, I mean, we probably should have led off with this one, because this is from the can be the biggest kind of wedge for families, and I've been talking, Rick Clark, the director of admission, undergraduate admission at Georgia Tech, and I have been talking a lot about this idea of wedges in the college admission experience, and these things that can drive apart families. And that's the biggest one, right? Is this kind of that every conversation ends up being about college, especially as students get to the end of high school and they're kind of in the middle of the experience of applying. Every conversation about a grade or about an activity or everything turns into college. And that can be such a, wear people out really quickly. And so what we recommend, and you probably do this too, is just that you pick one night a week, right? And you, like, maybe it's Sunday nights, at 7:00 after dinner or whatever. And that be the night you talk about college. So it really kind of compartmentalizes things, and you can then also have a life outside of the college admission experience. And so if parents and students can agree to just limiting things to that one time, then that's a chance for parents to say, okay, what have you done this week on your application? And
I think you're not, once again, you're not saying, Brennan, that if a student has a burning question on one day other than those 7 days, that they can't feel as if they couldn't bring it up. But I'm sure you're talking about mostly parent initiated conversation. No, that's, just last week, I had a student who you never would have thought would ever do this, but he just finally said, I can't take it. A boarding school student, and the parents had flown out there for a weekend, and it was 24/7. And it can be perceived by the student as, do you care about any other aspect of my life? And it also adds to the pressure they feel, because without knowing it, you're sending a message that if, you don't get in a particular place, then somehow I'm disappointed. I mean, it has all kinds of, ramifications with our next subject. Well, why don't we transition to that, and knowing that, go ahead, say something, Brennan. Yep.
Well, let me just say one last thing on that. And that's that I think it goes both ways too, right? Because what the conversation I have with students a lot of times is that, the reason your parents sometimes are talking so much about college is because you're not giving them any information, right? So parents are kind of wondering where their student is with things and, where their thinking is. And because the student's not providing much to the parent, that's why they're always asking about it. And so that's why if you have that weekly check-in, then the parent can have comfort that, okay, I'm going to get some information on
I'm really
Sunday
glad you brought
night
that up
about where
that's
things
so
are
important.
with us.
Thanks for sharing that, Brennan.
Next week in the news, why universities are phasing out luxury dorms. And we'll be in chapter 40 of 171 answers. And we're sharing what you need to know about the SAT test. And next week's question is from a mom who wants to know if she contributes more to her retirement account in order to reduce her adjusted income for tax purposes. Would it also reduce her income in the eyes of the financial aid office, therefore making her child more eligible for need-based financial aid? And Mark will be in part 2 of his interview with Mr. Brennan Barnard on the common mistakes parents make in the admissions process. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send it to someone you know who could really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. Marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And Your College Bound Kid is produced by Esteban Sartho. If you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you would like to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text at area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on each show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.